Okay, guys, I'm going to pick up where Kay left off and talk about the water supply, how it affects production, and practices that save water. Kay, do you mind kicking those slides for me? My name's Buddy Allen, and I serve on the task force that Kay was describing, the Sustainable Groundwater Task Force with Pete Hunter. We represent the Mississippi Delta. I'm a farmer in Tunica, and I work for a government affairs company out of Washington on conservation issues, some too. Okay. Like I said, I serve on Kay's task force, and before we got as far along as we are now, the first time we sat down, we set goals, and there were three things: to simply quantify the deficit, which is what your metering program is about. You know, how big is the overdraft, and then what can we do with conservation to reduce the size of the overdraft, and then when there is a presumed shortage, what will the alternative supplies be to address it, like the gentleman in the back is asking about. Those were our initial goals. Kay's pretty well described the declining aquifer, but to put a little more color on it, this is a cross-section of the Alluvial Aquifer, and as you can see in the central delta is where the top level has been drawn down the most. This was done in 2010, but at that point we'd drawn down the top level of the aquifer in the central delta almost 50 feet. And this is an aerial look at the topography of the top level of the alluvial aquifer, and you can see in 1980 there weren't as many contour lines as there are 30 years later in 2010 because we've drawn that cone in the central delta down. That's what we commonly refer to as the hole in our aquifer, the central delta, where the drawdown has been the most. One more time, this just shows the change in 8 years and where it's, you know, Sunflower, Bolivar County, where its epicenter is. Okay.
Hey, Buddy, real quick, just out of curiosity, is it because more water is drawn there, or is it because of the natural shape of the aquifer?
Okay, go back a slide, police guy. Water runs from north to south, just like surface water. Groundwater runs from north to south. There's not a lot of lateral movement. That's why the river doesn't give us the recharge of the central aquifer. That's why it would have to be cleaned and moved, like you were discussing. The central delta is the farthest point from the two primary recharges, the Mississippi River and the Bluff Hills. And there may be a correlation with the practices and cultural themes in agriculture down there.
Perfect storm.
He's trying to be politically correct. All right, so there's the declining nature of the aquifer. Kay and I both talked about it. I think it's clear. The impact it has on production, I want to talk about our current ag econ conditions and the outcomes that will result from addressing the declining aquifer from the regulatory side, as well as what the alternative supply projects hypothetically could be. So if y'all don't take anything away from today, take this away. Pete Hunter said earlier that farmers are picking up cans on the side of the road right now to get by. This is USDA's release of farm revenues that came out in November of 15. So this is current. It's declined 53% since 2013. Gross farm revenues to producers has declined over half. Look at that. Landlords, that's why your tenants are screaming about the rent. That's why bankers are looking for collateral, because it's not a rumor, it's fact. Okay. Kay, we're very lucky to have the relationship with DEQ. I'm very grateful for it, because she can go through the law and talk kindly, but the reality of it is they are charged with the responsibility of maintaining the integrity of this aquifer. It does not belong to us. If you own a tract of land and have the mineral rights, the diamonds and crude oil underneath it are yours, but the water's not. It belongs to the state of Mississippi. And it's a public resource, and they're charged to regulate it, so it's for public benefit going forward. We've got a tremendous amount of liberty as users. I don't want to knock on my friends at Farm Bureau. Their Mississippi policy says they oppose any allocation of water. Well, that's in opposition to state law, not DEQ. We're very fortunate to be able to pay $10 and get a permit and be able to farm irrigated crops on all of our farms in the Mississippi Delta. We should take that and consider it. And we know that while we do receive 50 inches of annual rainfall, that we're completely dependent upon irrigation in the Mississippi Delta. I think studies show that 65% more revenues associated on the 5-year average with irrigated versus non-irrigated crops when you average the soybeans, cotton, and corn together. Okay. Alternative supply. The only thing I would disagree with Kay, and I appreciate the fact she said conservation may not be enough. We used to say conservation won't be enough. I'm of the school where I'm not sure about that. Nobody's proven that to me. We're learning more every day about what conservation will do. We'll learn more tomorrow. I told you the initial goals of the task force, quantify the deficit. Well, some of us got so fixated on that we couldn't think about conservation or finding other sources. Some of us think conservation should be discounted. I'm of the camp that I think conservation might can do it all. And then some of us are so fixated on the alternative supplies that we can't think about the first two things. But here's some of the ideas we're kicking around now in the task force, and we're not limited to this. We have not settled it. These are some of the ideas that are coming to the top now. You know, maximizing irrigation water efficiency practices, diverting surface water from the Tallahatchie Quiver River through the Bogue into the Central Delta, so there's more surface water available. More large-scale tailwater recovery or storage projects, groundwater to groundwater transfers where there is more recharge to less recharge, so you don't have to do the cleaning that you were describing, and then impounding water with weirs. So the last part of my talk, and I'm going to move on through this, are conservation practices that save water, and none of this is breaking news. Some of these are maybe new to you. I always try to keep a few things in my talks that I think are coming down the road. But in the economic climate we're in right now, conservation has got to yield productivity that yields sustainability. Nobody can afford to go increase their expenses. You know, we're all conservationists as farmers until it costs. And oftentimes farmers get skittish on conservation at that point. So conservation best management practices now have got to save money. They've got to increase production. They've got to be relevant to the production systems that we're in, and they can't require us to go replicate our infrastructure. Don't tell me to build a surface water pump next to a groundwater well. I can't afford it in this market. So here are some practices I want to talk about. The computerized hole selection, pipe planter, faucet, whatever they all are, it's a no-brainer. Chris is in here. It makes your job easier. You save money. You're better irrigators. It makes your life simpler. I'm going to put more color on that later. Soil moisture probes should be used in tandem. Winston's my consultant. I am the most guilty of overwatering and watering, irrigating based on mood. That's not the way you want to do it. You need to monitor your soil. You need to know when to irrigate. You need to plan. You need to make your scheduling in advance. You're going to irrigate less. You're going to harm your crop less. You're going to make more yield, and you're going to save money while you're doing it. Surge valves I don't have as much experience with, but it's primarily about layering this water on so it can infiltrate on these capping soils, these silty capping soils. Jason Kreutz isn't here now, but he loves a surge valve. And all I farm is buckshot, so I don't use many of them. Cover crops, I've got a lot of confidence in. Their efficacy is tremendous. Anybody who's seen information on it would say the same thing, but it's only on about 0.1% of all production agriculture in the United States. So to think that that's going to really come in and make a big impact today is probably dreaming. Timers and pump automation are simple. If you know it's going to run out in the middle of the night, it'll cut it off. Polyacrylamide, PAM, we refer to it as a new one. I've been doing some work on it. I'm really excited about PAM, and I'm going to come back to what PAM is. Some of these new ones, I've got a few more slides that I'm going to come back to. Adding a microbial-based fertility system into our traditional fertility system is something I'm excited about. So many of the times I have trouble with fertility. It's not that it's not out there. The plant can't get it. You know, so how do I address this from a plant side, not an application side? Everybody's had a stunted crop, and you want to shake it, but you can't do anything with it. Zero and modified, zero grade and modified is where you put that little crown in it, so you don't have to pull a levee to raise a rice crop, but you can irrigate a little better. You just simply use about 25% of the water as a old traditional contour system. which has been the evolution. Side inlet rice, Chris, how much you save?
25%.
25% of your water, fuel, labor. Gateless revolutionized rice farming for me. We raise a lot of rice. We don't use any gates. We treat every paddy like an individual zero grade. We catch every drop of rainfall. We don't spill any water, any nitrogen, any nutrients from top to bottom. And goodness, we got rid of some labor. Tailwater recovery. We are harvesting nitrogen. We are harvesting nitrogen and nutrients in solution in storm events and applying them to our crops instead of sending them into the Gulf. Intermittent flooding. I've always been hot and cold on that, but I think downstream as we see more regulatory pressure, more opportunities for carbon exchange and that sort of thing, it's going to continue to be in your face and there are going to be opportunities built around it. And rice water level sensing is something I've got more slides on, but that's a component of RCPP, how we can start to automate our rice flood and maintenance of our rice flood. So I want to go through 4 or 5 of these and give a little more color on the practice. This is one of Chris's slides on pipe planter, where Charles McClintock says, with the help of pipe planter, I reduced my watering time, I saved $3,000, and I still made my crop. It just works. Here's one of Jason's slides where he, in his riser program, where he combined a moisture probe with computerized hole selection model, and he had a scientific design. He used half the hours of energy, half the fuel, applied half the water, saved that much money, and the savings are relative to fuel cost and all the different things. But the efficiencies on my farm, the first year I used pipe planter, I went from like 68 actual physical changes and settings to like 36. So it just made life that much easier. Cover crops, you get the irrigation efficiency, the nutrient mining. What that means is instead of nutrients reaching down, it's actually pulling them up into availability. There's weed control with these noxious weed pests. Soil health is a effect from cover crops, and like all these things, there's yield when you have living, healthier soil with nutrients available that can be infiltrated and utilize water more efficiently. It's not magic, it's just all these things work together. Pam was talking about earlier, I got that header a little high. PAM's a flocculant. It causes particles to bind together into bigger particles. It does 2 things primarily on my farm in irrigation water. The first thing is a water quantity issue where these small fines on these capping silty soils bind together into larger particles that water can move in between more easily. So I get this added infiltration. Instead of this water whisking across the top, like Pete talked about in his talk, we're getting that infiltration. When I'm using one of Brett's Ag Smart soil moisture probes, I'm hitting lower, I'm getting lower, I'm getting the penetration every time the pivot goes around that I wouldn't otherwise. The other is a water quality issue. When these particles bind together, what are they? They're heavier because they're larger. They settle out of solution along with the nutrients they're carrying with them. It doesn't end up in the dead zone in the Gulf. It does stay on your field. It does create a bushel of rice. There's a yield component. Once again, it's not magic. It's the nitrogen and phosphorus making the yield, not the polyacrylamide. The PAM helps to keep it in your field. Here's some study done by Mississippi State in conjunction with Helena, and while I'm on PAM, Helena is distributed under the name Retention for the liquid emulsion, Silk Bond for the dry. SNF is the global leader in manufacture of PAM for agriculture. But this shows how the runoff was decreased, the infiltration was increased, next slide. Erosion was reduced, next slide, which resulted in a yield benefit. And there it is. That's what we're shooting for. These are conservation practices that keep us in business because they don't cost, they provide. Rice water level sensing. This is old and new. This is kind of the beginning when we learned how to make float sensors in our shops, and NRCS will give you $3 a piece for them. And now through the Ducks Unlimited USA Rice Federation RCPP grant, which is providing incentives for rice irrigation water management practices. This is one of the practices, and the newest way is by laser sensing, which I see the Ag Smarts people here, they're going to be very involved in helping us meet our commitments to USDA and RCS through that grant. So we're excited to see more technology, more options, more sensing come through the pipeline on these practices. And I want to give just a snapshot of what conservation can really do to this water problem, and I wanted to do it through rice. So here, all these slides are a few years old, but they're still relevant. Acres by crop in the Mississippi Delta. Okay, rice is way down at the bottom, acres by crop. 200,000, 220,000 at that time. Okay, now water use by crop in the Mississippi Delta. Guess what? Rice is way up at the top. Okay, next slide. So how significant is it? 10% of the crop acres that year used 57% of the water. So I'd say that's really significant. So here's what's happened through the years. We raised rice like this. Everybody surveyed the contour levees. Who's still got a laser? You know, somebody does. Then we went to straight levee. And we cut the water use from 3.8 to about 3 foot per acre. And then we learned about side inlet, and we cut it down even lower. And then we learned about zero grade, and we got it even lower. And since then, we've learned how to, this year I averaged 12 acre inches on my whole rice crop, of zero grade, excuse me. So you can really get it down. Next slide. And guess what happens? Instead of this, you know, this environment, we move to this environment. Which one do you think's got more rice in it? This contour, straight levee, zero grade. Our productivity went through the roof. Costs went down. We're using 25% of the water that we used to. So what does that mean? Just in this snapshot on rice, 40 to 50% savings per acre can result in 25% savings in total water use in the state of Mississippi. I mean, that gets to Kay's goal. Next slide. So my conclusion is, as we go down this process and we realize that we have a problem and we've got to address it and the trend is bad, let's don't discount the impact of conservation. Let's don't jump into some water diversion project that's going to cost a tremendous amount of money. And who's going to pay for it? We're all going to pay for it. As water users, as citizens. We're all, you know, so I'm just adamant about maximizing the opportunity in conservation and productivity before we add cost to ourselves. And my last slide, one more after the conclusion, and put my government affairs hat on just for a minute. Now this $1.15 trillion omnibus spending bill that a government just passed in December so we could keep the doors open in the government for 2 years, which was a good piece of legislation. Cut $321 million out of EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentives Program. Now it was pretty good as a whole for conservation. CSP and the easements came out all right, but EQIP, our working lands programs, our rice farm programs, got hit pretty hard. So keep that in mind. Keep your eye on Washington. Keep in contact with Dwight and all our friends and representation from our commodity agencies, our conservation agencies. We're all lobbyists, whether we like it or not, and we depend on support for these programs, and I thought that was noteworthy. So I'll stop there, and Kay and I can both take a question if you have it. No questions?
I must have covered everything.
Must have covered everything.